Miss Washington, you missed a spot. Imani didn't look up from the marble floor she'd been scrubbing for the past 20 minutes. The voice belonged to Mrs. Lim, the head of household staff, who had a gift for finding imperfection in anything Imani touched. Where? Imani kept her tone even. Professional. There. Mrs. Lim's shoe, Italian leather, probably worth more than Imani's monthly rent, pointed to a section of floor so spotless it reflected the chandelier overhead like still water. Imani took the cloth and wiped the invisible spot again. Around her, she felt the other staff members watching, waiting to see if she'd finally break. She'd been working at the CO estate for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of this. Better. Mrs. Lim walked away, her footsteps echoing through the entrance hall. Naomi Sterling, the senior housekeeper, appeared beside Imani the moment Mrs. Lim disappeared around the corner. Don't let her get to you, Naomi said quietly. She was the only person on staff who'd shown Imani anything resembling kindness. I'm fine. Imani sat back on her heels, looking up at the older woman. Naomi had kind eyes, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like pity. You remind me of someone, Naomi said, not for the first time. Before Imani could respond, a commotion erupted from the main staircase. Minsu Co descended like he owned the place, which technically he would someday. The chairman's son was 43 and walked like every step was a board meeting. He stopped when he saw Imani on the floor. We really are hiring anyone these days, he said to no one in particular. 3 staff members laughed. Not because it was funny but because he was who he was. Imani started to stand, but Minsu held up a hand. No, don't get up on my account. You look natural down there. The words landed exactly how he'd meant them to. Naomi's hand tightened on her cleaning caddy, but she said nothing. No one said anything. Imani met Minsu's eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to let him know she'd heard him. Long enough to let him know she wasn't broken. Then she turned back to the floor. He laughed and continued toward the garage. Hey, real quick before we continue, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing who's here for these stories. That evening, Imani was cleaning the chairman's private study on the 2nd floor when she heard voices in the hallway. She'd been told Chairman CO was at a medical appointment and wouldn't return until late, so the study should have been safe territory. She froze, cloth in hand, as the door opened. Chairman CO Daehyun entered, leaning slightly on a cane she'd never seen him use before. He was 74, silver-haired, and carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Imani started to apologize, to explain she'd been told the room would be empty, but something about the way he was looking at her made the words catch in her throat. He wasn't looking at her like she was the help. He was looking at her like he was seeing a ghost. Sir, I'm sorry I was told. What's your name? His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Imani Washington, sir. I started 3 weeks ago. Washington, he repeated, still staring. Your mother's name? The question was so unexpected that Imani answered before she could think better of it. Zara Powell. She adopted me when I was 3 days old. She passed away last year. Something changed in his expression. Pain maybe. Or recognition. Your birth mother? He said quietly. Do you know her name? Imani's throat tightened. This wasn't the kind of conversation you had with your employer. This wasn't the kind of conversation she had with anyone. Naomi Clark, she said. She died the day I was born. I never knew anything else about her. Chairman CO closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. Leave us, he said, but not to her. Imani turned and realized Naomi Sterling had appeared in the doorway behind him. The senior housekeeper looked stricken, torn between orders and something else. Sir. Please, Naomi. Naomi left, but not before giving Imani a look that seemed to say I'm sorry and be careful at the same time. The chairman moved to his desk and lowered himself into the chair like every movement hurt. How old are you, Miss Washington? 28. 29 next month. He nodded slowly, doing math in his head. April 16th? Imani's hands went cold. How did you know that? Because I was there. His voice broke on the last word. I was there when you were born. The story came out in pieces. Chairman CO didn't tell it chronologically. He started with the end, Naomi Clark dying in a Portland hospital, her hand in his, their daughter crying in an incubator 3 rooms away. Then he jumped backward to the beginning, a business trip to Seattle 30 years ago, a brilliant American consultant named Naomi who understood international markets better than anyone he'd ever met, conversations that turned into something neither of them had planned for. He'd been married. Naomi had known that. They'd agreed it would end when the project ended. Except she got pregnant. She didn't tell me for 5 months, he said, staring at his hands. When she finally did, I offered her money. I offered her everything except the one thing she actually wanted. Which was for me to stay. He looked up at Imani and she saw her own eyes looking back at her. The same unusual shade of dark amber. She never asked me to leave my wife. She just asked if I loved her enough to be part of our child's life. And I said no. Imani felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Why? Because I was a coward. The words came out flat, factual. My wife, Kyungja, couldn't have children. It had devastated her. Devastated us. If I'd claimed a child with another woman, especially an American woman, it would have destroyed her. Destroyed my family's reputation. The business. So you chose all of that over your own daughter? Yes. He didn't try to soften it. Naomi moved to Portland. Had you alone? There were complications during delivery. By the time I got there, she was dying. She made me promise 2 things, that I'd make sure you went to a good family, and that I'd never tell you who I was unless I could offer you a real place in my life. And you chose never. Until 3 weeks ago. He pulled open a desk drawer and removed a folder. My doctor gave me 6 months. Maybe less. Kyungja passed away 4 years ago. Minsu is my heir, but he's not my only child. And I've spent 29 years watching you from a distance, making sure you were safe, and telling myself I was doing the right thing by staying away. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside was Imani's entire life. Report cards from elementary school. A newspaper clipping of her high school track team. Photos of her and Zara at her college graduation. Medical bills from Zara's final hospital stay, marked paid in full, with dates from 18 months ago. You paid for her treatment. I owed her everything. She raised my daughter with more love than I had any right to hope for. Imani's hands were shaking. Why hire me as a cleaner? Why put me through? She couldn't even finish the sentence. 3 weeks of humiliation. Of being treated like she was less than human. Because I needed to see who you'd become, he said quietly. I needed to know if you had your mother's strength. Her dignity. And I needed you to see this world, this family, exactly as it is before I offered you a place in it. Does anyone else know? Naomi Sterling. She was Naomi Clark's sister. She's worked for me for 30 years, watching over you from a distance the same way I have. He paused. And I believe Minsu suspects something. He had you investigated the week you were hired. Why? Because you look like your mother. And because I've never personally approved a cleaning staff hire in my life. Until you. Imani stood, needing to move, needing to breathe. What happens now? That depends on you. Chairman Seo stood as well, slower, leaning on the cane. I plan to acknowledge you publicly as my daughter. To give you your rightful place in this family and this company. But only if you want it. Only if you can forgive a dying old man who wasted 29 years being afraid. Through the study windows, Imani could see the estate gardens, manicured and perfect. Beyond them, the gate where she'd walked in 3 weeks ago, prepared to scrub floors and take whatever job she could get to pay off Zara's remaining debts. Zara, who taught her that dignity wasn't about where you worked or how people treated you. It was about knowing your own worth even when the world refused to see it. I need time, Imani said. Of course. He opened a drawer and withdrew a key. Your mother, Naomi Clark, had an apartment in the East Wing. I've kept it exactly as she left it. You're welcome to stay there. Or you can leave and never come back. Either way, everything I have to give you is yours. Imani took the key. It was warm in her palm, like it had been waiting for her. She didn't decide that night. She went to the East Wing apartment and found a home frozen in time. Books in English and Korean. Photos of a young woman who had Imani's smile. A journal that started with "Today I met someone" and ended with "If you're reading this, my baby girl, know that you were loved." She read until sunrise. Minsu found out 2 days later. Imani had moved into the East Wing apartment but continued working her cleaning job. She needed time to process, to plan, to figure out who she was in this impossible situation. The chairman had respected her request for privacy. Minsu didn't. She was cleaning the second-floor hallway when he appeared, holding a folder that looked disturbingly similar to the one his father had shown her. We need to talk, he said, not asking, not requesting. Imani set down her supplies. About? About whatever con you're running on my father. He opened the folder. Imani Washington. Raised in Portland by a single mother. Graduated with a degree in art history. Worked as a gallery assistant until your mother got sick. Broke and desperate enough to take a cleaning job 400 miles from home. He looked up. Convenient timing, showing up here with a dead mother who conveniently shares a name with my father's long-lost mistress. I'm not running anything. Then explain why my father, who has never once personally involved himself in household staffing decisions, specifically requested you be hired. Explain why you're living in the East Wing. Explain why Naomi Sterling guards you like you're made of glass. Imani met his eyes. Ask your father. I did. He told me to mind my business. Minsu's voice dropped. Dangerous now. This company is my business. This family is my business. And I will not watch some opportunistic stranger manipulate a sick old man out of what's rightfully mine. I didn't even know who he was when I applied for this job. Prove it. She couldn't, of course, because the truth was so much stranger than the con he was imagining. Minsu stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign. Today. You'll sign a document stating you have no claim to this family or its assets. In exchange, I'll give you $50,000 and a reference for your next employer. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. The help who seduced a dying man for his money. The con artist who preyed on grief. I'll destroy your name so thoroughly you'll never work again. The old Imani, the one from 3 weeks ago, might have been scared. But she'd spent the past 48 hours reading her mother's journal. Learning about a woman who'd loved a man enough to let him go, who'd faced death with more courage than most people showed in their entire lives. Do what you need to do, Imani said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. His face darkened. You have no idea what you're playing with. Neither do you. He left, but she knew it wasn't over. That afternoon, Chairman CO collapsed during a board meeting. The hospital waiting room was full of people who looked like they belonged there. Business partners in expensive suits. Executives with worried expressions that might have been genuine. Minsu, playing the devoted son, fielding phone calls about his father's condition. Imani stood in the corner, still wearing her cleaning uniform because she'd been in the middle of her shift when Naomi found her. No one acknowledged her. To them she was furniture. Except Naomi, who stayed beside her, a steady presence. He's been refusing treatment, Naomi whispered. The cancer is aggressive. He has maybe 3 months left, and that's if he starts chemotherapy immediately. Why would he refuse? Because he's been waiting for you. Naomi's voice cracked. He told me weeks ago that he wasn't going to fight to stay alive unless he could fix what he'd broken. Unless he could bring you home. The doctor appeared and Minsu rushed to meet him. Imani caught pieces of the conversation. Stable. Sedated. Family only. Minsu turned and looked directly at Imani. Staff should wait in the main lobby. The dismissal was clear. Public. Naomi started to object, but Imani touched her arm. It's fine. It's not fine. You're his daughter. Not according to anyone here. Imani grabbed her bag. Tell him I'll come by tomorrow. She made it to the elevator before Naomi caught up to her. He has something for you, Naomi said, breathless. He told me if anything happened to him before he could do this properly, I should give you this. She held out a sealed envelope, thick and formal. Inside was a document. Legal. Notarized. Dated 3 weeks earlier, the day Imani had started working at the estate. Last will and testament of Co Dae-hyun. Amendment and codicil. She scanned the dense legal language until she found her name. To my daughter, Imani Washington, biological child of myself and Naomi Clark, I bequeath, was everything. 50% of his personal estate. Equal ownership in the family company. The East Wing apartment. Her mother's belongings. A seat on the board. Everything Minsu thought was his alone. He filed this the day you were hired, Naomi said. Before he'd even confirmed you were who he thought you were. He said if he was wrong he'd destroy it. But if he was right, he wanted you protected even if something happened to him before he could make things right publicly. Imani's hands were shaking. Minsu knows, doesn't he? That's why he came after me today. His lawyers probably told him the moment it was filed. He's been trying to get your father to revoke it. What do I do? Naomi took her hands. That depends. Do you want to be Co Dae-hyun's daughter? Because once you claim that, there's no going back. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting people who think you don't belong. People who'll never see you as anything but the help who got lucky. I've already spent my whole life fighting people who think I don't belong, Imani said. At least this time I know I have a right to be in the room. Chairman Co woke up 6 hours later. Imani was beside his bed. She'd badged and using the ID Naomi had given her, walked past the nurses who tried to stop her, and planted herself in the chair beside him. When his eyes opened, the first thing he said was, "You came." "Of course I came. Min-soo tried to pay me to leave. Then tried to throw me out of the hospital." She held up the envelope. "Naomi gave me this." He smiled, weak but genuine. "I was going to tell you this weekend. Make it official. I wanted to do it right. Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning? Why make me work as a cleaner? Because I needed you to see the worst of this world before you decided if you wanted to be part of it." He reached for her hand. His grip was fragile, nothing like she'd imagined a father's hand would feel. "And because I needed to know you could survive it. That you had her strength. Did I pass the test? You exceeded every hope I had." He coughed, wincing. "There's a board meeting scheduled for Monday. I was going to announce you then. Introduce you as my daughter and heir. But now you're in a hospital bed and Min-soo thinks he's won. He's already moving to have me declared incompetent. He'll argue I'm mentally unfit, that you manipulated me, that the will should be voided." Imani thought about Min-soo's smug face in the waiting room. About 3 weeks of humiliation. About her mother's journal and the life stolen from her before she even had a chance to live it. "Then we move faster," she said. "We do the announcement now. Today. From this hospital room if we have to. He'll destroy you. He'll try." She squeezed her father's hand. "But I've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "Nothing to lose. And a mother who taught me that dignity isn't given, it's claimed." Chairman Seo smiled. It made him look 20 years younger. "Then let's give them something to talk about." The press conference happened in the hospital's media room 6 hours later. Chairman Seo, against doctor's orders, sat in a wheelchair at a microphone. Beside him, Imani stood in the same cleaning uniform she'd been wearing all day. She'd thought about changing, but this felt more honest. The room was packed. Business reporters. Society journalists. Cameras from every major outlet. Min-soo stood in the back, his lawyer beside him, both wearing expressions that promised war. Chairman Seo's voice was steady when he spoke. "I've spent my entire life building a legacy," he began. "A company. A reputation. A family name that meant something. And in that pursuit, I made a choice 29 years ago that has haunted me every day since." The room went silent. "I abandoned my daughter." He let the words land. "Her name is Imani Washington. Her mother was Naomi Clark, a woman I loved and lost, whose final wish was that I protect our child. And for 29 years I told myself that protection meant distance. That keeping her away from this world was the kindest thing I could do." He looked up at Imani. "I was wrong. And I've asked her here today to formally acknowledge what should have been public knowledge from the beginning. Imani is my daughter. She is an heir to the Seo family and the Seo Corporation. And she has shown more strength in 3 weeks working as a cleaner in my home than I've shown in 3 decades of running this company." A reporter shouted a question. Then another. The room erupted. But Chairman Seo held up a hand. "I know what you're thinking. That this is a dying man's delusion. That she's manipulated me. That there's no proof." He nodded to Naomi, who stepped forward with a folder. "We've conducted DNA testing. The results are in your press packets. Imani Washington is my biological daughter. And as of 3 weeks ago, she became an equal heir in my estate and a partner in this company." Min-soo pushed through the crowd. "This is a travesty. My father is ill. He's not thinking clearly. This woman," Chairman Seo interrupted, his voice sharp despite his weakened state, "has more right to stand beside me than anyone in this room. Including you, Min-soo." The camera swung toward Min-soo. Imani watched his face cycle through rage, calculation, humiliation. "You're making a mistake," Min-soo said quietly. "This will destroy everything we've built." "No," Chairman Seo said. "This will finally make it worth something." The press conference lasted 40 minutes. Imani answered questions about her childhood, her mother, her 3 weeks at the estate. She was honest about the treatment she'd received. About being told she was naturally suited to cleaning floors. About Min-soo's offer to pay her to disappear. By the time it was over, the story had gone viral. Korean business titan reveals secret daughter, who worked as cleaner in his home. Heir apparent tried to bribe half-sister before public acknowledgement. From mop to boardroom, the story of Imani Washington. Imani hated the headlines. But she understood their power. The legal battle lasted 3 months. Min-soo challenged the will. Challenged the DNA test. Challenged Imani's character, her motives, her right to exist in his family. But Chairman Seo had prepared for this. Every document was airtight. Every legal argument anticipated. And Imani showed up. To every deposition. Every hearing. Every board meeting where Minsu tried to paint her as an outsider. She wore her cleaning uniform to the first board meeting. Not as a costume but as a reminder. Some of you watched me scrub your floors, she said, standing at the front of the conference room. Some of you laughed when Minsu made jokes about where I belonged. And some of you said nothing, which might have been worse. The room was dead silent. I'm not here because I need your money or your approval. I'm here because my father asked me to be. Because before she died, my mother wrote in her journal that she hoped I'd grow up to be brave enough to take up space in rooms that didn't want me. She looked directly at Minsu. So I'm not going anywhere. You can fight me in court. You can try to humiliate me in the press. You can spend the rest of your life angry that you have to share what you thought was yours alone. She paused. Or you can accept that family is messier and bigger and more complicated than you wanted it to be. Your choice. Minsu chose to keep fighting. But the board voted to accept her. Not unanimously. Not enthusiastically. But they voted. Chairman Seo died 4 months after the press conference. He'd started treatment, bought himself a little extra time. Time to teach Imani the business. Time to introduce her to the people who mattered. Time to walk her through the East Wing apartment and tell her stories about her mother. Time to be her father. His funeral was massive. Dignitaries. Business leaders. Society figures who'd never spoken to Imani but now wanted to be photographed offering condolences. Minsu gave the eulogy. It was beautiful and empty. Imani scattered half of her father's ashes in Portland, at the cemetery where Naomi Clark was buried. The other half she scattered in the estate gardens, where he'd told her he used to walk when he was trying to decide whether to be brave enough to bring her home. 1 year later, Imani stood in the same entrance hall where she'd scrubbed floors on her first day. The house looked different now. Felt different. Or maybe she was what had changed. Naomi Sterling appeared beside her, just like she had that first day. Ready? Almost. Imani looked up at the chandelier, its reflection still perfect in the marble floor. Do you think she'd be proud? My mother? Both of them would be. Naomi squeezed her shoulder. They are. Through the windows, Imani could see the first guests arriving for the gala. An annual fundraiser the family hosted. Last year she'd cleaned up after it. This year she was hosting it. She'd used her inheritance to establish a foundation in Naomi Clark's name. Scholarships for first-generation college students. Support for families dealing with medical debt. Programs for women in male-dominated industries. Minsu had fought that too. But he'd lost. He still worked at the company. Still hated her. Still called her the help when he thought she couldn't hear. But he'd learned to coexist. And sometimes in board meetings when she made a decision their father would have approved of, she caught him looking at her with something that wasn't quite respect but wasn't quite hatred either. Maybe that was as close to peace as they'd get. Mrs. Lim appeared in the hallway, directing staff with her usual precision. She stopped when she saw Imani. Miss Seo, she said, the title still uncomfortable in her mouth. The caterers have a question about the... I'll handle it. Imani started toward the kitchen then stopped. Mrs. Lim? Yes. Thank you. For treating me exactly how you did when I worked here. It taught me who I never want to be. Mrs. Lim's face tightened but she nodded. Imani continued to the kitchen, Naomi beside her. The gala was perfect. The speeches were moving. The donations exceeded expectations. And when Imani stood to give the closing remarks, she looked out at a room full of people who'd once dismissed her and said the things she'd been practicing for weeks. My father once told me that he spent his whole life building a legacy. But what he didn't understand until the end was that legacy isn't what you build. It's who you become brave enough to love. She raised her glass. To Naomi Clark. To Zara Powell. To Seo Dae-hyun. And to everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, may you find the courage to prove them wrong. The room erupted in applause. Later, after the guests had left and the staff had gone home, Imani stood alone in the entrance hall. She looked down at the marble floor. Then she got down on her knees, pulled out a cloth, and wiped a small spot near the base of the staircase. Not because it was dirty, but because she needed to remember. That dignity wasn't about never being on your knees. It was about choosing when to stand up. What did this story teach you about the difference between worth and recognition? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see family, identity, and the courage it takes to claim your place in the world.